Okay, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you and welcome to this webinar on ending homelessness from social housing. We're really delighted so many of you could join us today. I think at the last count, we had almost 200 people registered, which I think really just shows the importance and the relevance of this issue right at this moment to practitioners across landlords, providers and government and local authorities. This webinar is being recorded, just to let you know. My name is Clarissa Corbisiera. I'm the Director of Policy and External Affairs at Community Housing Cymru. We're the trade body for housing associations in Wales. I'm really pleased to chair today's webinar and to have the opportunity to hear from the experience and expertise of our panellists throughout the day. We're really grateful to the Oak Foundation, who have sponsored this webinar, but are also funding a wider programme of work to Shelter Cymru, who are using it to support their influence in research activity around prevention of homelessness, but also to create opportunities like today where we can come together and share some of those challenges and opportunities to work together to end homelessness from social housing. I think almost every conversation that I've been in around this issue starts with how it's felt never more important to have a safe and secure home, and that during the pandemic, the absence of which has proved to be just so devastating for people. But also what's come through the conversations that certainly I've been in over the past weeks and months has been that real sense of collaboration and collegiate action from across partners in local authorities, housing providers and support organisations, as well as their relationships with Welsh Government as well, to really just do what needs to be done and to do it quickly. And today is really also about how we bottle some of that. How can we take that partnership working and that sense of that shared ambition and shared outcome, and what can we learn from that to take forward to our shared ambition to end homelessness from social housing? Now, we know homelessness isn't just a housing issue, and that partnership is really a prerequisite for success. And some of the speakers today I know will talk about the importance of partnership working to making progress to end homelessness from social housing. It's important, I think, to say that we're not at the end point here. Loads of progress have been made. We've seen rates of possession claims from social housing providers halve since 2006. But today is about progress and not perfection. It's all about learning and about being really honest and having an honest conversation about what's working and what's not, and where those barriers are still in place. We've seen huge progress during the pandemic and commitments made by landlords both before and during the pandemic to keep people safe and secure in their own homes, and long may that last. But there is still hard work to continue with. And I know from my day job that landlords are thinking hard about the approaches they take to housing management, to trauma-informed approaches, and to increasing partnership working across the piece. But that they're also thinking hard about what happens in that very small number of cases which result in someone being unable to remain in a social home. What then? How do we ensure that that household doesn't result in homelessness? So I'm hoping that our speakers will have some real insight into some of those really tricky questions and those challenges that face us all. What I'm going to really encourage today is that you ask as many questions as you like. Please use the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen to type your questions as our speakers are talking. Share your insights and your experience. We're really, really interested in capturing some of that learning. So to our first speaker. Our first speaker is Sue Dickinson from Wales and West Housing Association. Sue is a business improvement facilitator at Wales and West. She's played a key role in embedding systems thinking across the organisation. Wales and West have maintained a very low eviction rate in recent years, and Sue is going to share what her organisation has learned so far. So Sue, if you'd like to come on camera, the floor is yours.
That's lovely. Thanks, Clarissa. Now, there we are. Can we see that clearly? Okay, hello, and thank you very much for inviting me today. My name is Sue Dickinson. I work for Wales and West Housing, and I've been here for many years. and seen so many changes over the years. So today I'm just going to take you through a whistle-stop tour. I was going to be not loads of PowerPoints, but I'm sorry, I've got quite so much to show you. So just a little bit about us. Wales and West has got approximately 12,500 homes. We cover 15 local authority areas. And we strive to provide quality services to 20,000 of our residents. Our key focus is to help people sustain their tenancies if that's what they want to do. It's about preventing homelessness, and over the years our evictions have radically reduced, and shift in culture has truly helped us with this. So Wales and West is a systems thinking organisation, and systems thinking underpins everything we do. Over the past 15 years or so, Wales and West has been undergoing a big culture change, a shift in thinking. These are our three operating principles: know, understand, improve. Systems are our key business areas. Each system contains a purpose and what matters, along with measures from the customer perspective. And I'll explain a little bit more about that as we go on. And each system has mapped flow or process. We can't improve unless we have knowledge about the system. And I'm just going to give you a little example of one of the times we went into our rent system in 2010. So in 2010, we followed a flow of a new applicant coming in, signing their tenancy, and we put it all up on the wall, big flip chart papers everywhere. So the resident had applied for housing benefit, and we know there's a 5-week delay in housing benefit getting to us. The tenancy signed, and after a week, no rental housing benefits hit the system, the account. So we send a letter as per procedure. After 3 weeks, no rental housing benefits has hit the system. We send second, bit more scary letter as per procedure. The resident phones us really worried about the letters, told it's okay, ignore the letters. We have to send them as per procedure. After 4 weeks, no rent, housing benefit has hit the system, and we send a third, really scary letter as per procedure. In 5 weeks, the housing benefit hits the account as expected. Resident won't speak to us, and we remove the procedure. We also found when we looked at the rent system is that what made it so difficult for residents, this is, sort of ongoing, we are on a journey of learning. We found that the statements were complicated and, they were difficult to understand, and that was just us, let alone the residents. We found that there were lots of letters going out rather than face-to-face contact, talking to people. Upfront information at the beginning of the tenancy wasn't always clear, and nor it was at the end of the tenancy, which has prompted us to work harder at starting tenancies as well as we can, and also ending tenancies as well. We found that most people genuinely wanted to pay their rent. That busted a lot of our assumptions, because when we started, we thought there was a lot of won't payers, but we actually found that the residents going into the work and exploring their circumstances did want to pay but couldn't. Some of them were overwhelmed in debt. They had bailiffs knocking at the door. They had doorstep lenders. Lots of things were going in, multiple debt. So we genuinely found that people did want to pay, and our assumptions were slightly busted. So the current system will influence demand. When we look at a system, we go in, we follow a flow, we follow journeys, but we also have a look at what demand is hitting a system. And that's really quite interesting, because it helps tell us whether that demand is failure or value. Is it what we want, or is it what we don't want? The current system design will influence the demand. So just as an example here, when we looked at our letting system, I Want a Home system, we were overwhelmed, this is a few years ago, overwhelmed in demand. Can you send me an application form? So if we had just responded to demand, we would have, keep sending out application forms. But what the actual question was, can I have a home? We looked into the way the application form process worked, and we found there were huge amounts of delays, hand backs, so people were sending forms in, they weren't correctly filled out, we didn't have enough information, we'd send them back again, they'd go to the wrong area, there were lots of delays. So what we did as a consequence of that was we did away with the application forms, and now we phone people and we have a conversation with them and learn an awful lot more from that conversation. And as I said earlier, each system contains a purpose and what matters. And just to show you here a purpose, this is just an example. This is I Want a Home, it's our letting system, and the purpose to enable people to apply for and move into a property that suits them and create a home with the right help. And the what matters has been derived from collecting demand, understanding what matters to our applicants and residents. I'll just give you a minute to read through that. You'll be fed up with my voice soon. With the purpose and the what matters, that gives us something to measure against. So we're able to work our measures so we can understand how we are achieving purpose and what matters. And also it will change as well, possibly over time, because demand changes. As with, can you send me an application form? Once we did away with that part of the system, the demand changed. So demand is changing all the time. We also look at people measures. I love going into the work and understanding people and their circumstances. I've had a lot to do with the people measures. Here we have the pyramid, the triangle, I'm okay, I need help, or I'm in chaos. The residents that are okay, that's great, they're not hitting the systems. I need help, depending how that help is provided, may depend where they go in the pyramid, or I'm in chaos. The categories aren't prescriptive. Some may see it as I need help, and some may see it as I'm in chaos. And this is our perspective of the resident situation. If they haven't got enough money to feed themselves, they can't pay their rent, their property needs attention, we would probably put them in I'm in chaos until we get some help. And we would want to see them move from I'm in chaos into I need help, and then into I'm okay. So it's a useful measure for us to have to see how these people circumstances are improving. And then next to it, we have an outcome star. All of these outcome stars and pyramids are on each tenancy on our system dynamics. Not everybody has an outcome star, only those that have in what matters that's hitting on the system. We don't have any fixed categories. It's in residents' own words. We did away, when we first started looking at tenancy sustainability in more detail, with some of the standard forms that we had, because we found that the forms that we had really inhibited a good conversation and getting to meet the person. And we found that by going out with no forms and just small talk often makes big discoveries, and we were far more able to create rapport and a better relationship from the very beginning, and have that safer conversation. So we did do away with the forms. that we used to fill when we first met residents. On the outcome star, 10 is worst, so that's outside the outcome star, and perfect is in the middle. So here we've got not drinking too much, I need to get into a good routine to avoid falling into old habits, and we just keep it into their own words, and we've got scope to put notes behind. It really does help us by having a better conversation, getting better at asking better questions to get to the crux of what the problem is. And that really has taken some practice. I remember a consultant said to me that, asking these good questions to get good answers, that, and I thought I can talk to anybody, but actually it does, questions like, what keeps you awake at night? What really matters to you? And I do use, but a lot of people poo-poo it, is if I had a magic wand, what would you wish for? Because sometimes people will tell us what they think we want to hear or what we can offer them. So yeah, I've tried all sorts. Understanding the problem to fix. We are finding many residents have difficulties with, paying their rent or sustaining their tenancies for all sorts of reasons. And I think more in old world, we used to very much look at the presenting problem rather than delve underneath. And I think this has been work in process. I know lots of us are doing this now, but this is just a couple of examples of the what. I can't pay all my rent this month, but I'll make it up next month. And we found in some cases where we've looked at them, if we got in and had a better conversation that first time, captured that trigger, we might have found a lot more and been able to be more preventative. And this is a real case. This is, I keep losing my jobs, then I have to go on benefits. This mucks me up financially. My health isn't so good. I haven't been to the doctor. I don't think they can help. I get really low. And when I get low, I muck up my work. It's a vicious circle. So by having that better conversation, and I know loads are doing that now, but it does help us understand the problem to fix. It's not about just getting that rent in next month. It's about understanding what the cause is. And just one more, I'm responding to the complaint about noise. I'll make less noise so I don't disturb the neighbours. The why, when we went in and had a conversation, I had my friends in from the shelter. I was on the streets for many years and I missed them a lot. I never wanted to move here, but my support worker thought it was a good idea. I'm not happy. And in fact, unfortunately, that was one of the tenancies that wasn't sustained. She left. So we found that by showing the presenting problem and the people or the person on one page is really helping us to understand the problem to fix. This looks really busy and you won't be able to read all the writing. But the blue line here is the arrears line or the rent line. So as you can see, this is a journey taken of one tenancy where the arrears are increasing. This is a lady who stopped engaging. All the red is non-engagement. A lot of time was spent trying to get the lady to engage. Above it, adjacent to the timeline, you'll see the outcome star, with 10 being the worst, so further outside on the outcome star. And then as time has gone on, we're beginning to shrink, which is what we'd want to see. What it shows is that the arrears are increasing, but the better that we are getting at understanding what is the problem to fix, what is the underlying cause of the increasing demand, we can see that the arrears are now starting to come down. Where the line is, this is where the new approach really sort of kicked in. Some of it before had been a bit old world. Although lots of good things were tried, this resident had scars from old world. This resident then, she now is paying her direct debit every month. She's been paying for well, quite some time now. When we met her, when the staff met her, she had eating disorder. But since she has worked with the new approach, she met somebody who absolutely didn't speak directly about rent, but about, how are things going for you to get to understand the problem. Things have so much improved. She's been to the doctor, she's put 2 stone on in weight, she's having counselling, and so is her son. So that is brilliant. This lady also is doing helping us with an article that she's putting a day in the life of herself into our resident magazine, because what she said was that by helping us, she would be happy to help other people who are in the same situation. She described the situation as, I'm in a black hole, I don't know how to get out. But working with her, she certainly has got out of her situation. And we're never going to fix everything. There's lots of issues, but we're not going to fix that. We just want her to be able to live and have a home and live the way she wants to live. We're learning all the time, and from some of these cases, we're learning loads. What we've been told by some of the residents is they want to be listened to and understood. They don't want to be judged. They want to be treated with respect and dignity. They want to be treated with kindness. They want someone they can trust and count on, and they want us to work at a pace that's right for them. We've also learned more. So following some of the journeys with residents who, many of them suffer, many of the residents that get close to possibly not sustaining their tenancies have got mental health problems or health problems, ACEs. In fact, most of the cases that I've ever come across have got these sort of issues. And what they tell us, and walking through some of the journeys with some of these residents to try and get support, it really isn't easy. So I can't afford to get to all the appointments. I don't want to go alone. I'm scared. I've told my story over and over again to different people. It's really painful. I feel overwhelmed in debt. I don't know where to start. I don't meet the criteria to get help. I tried to get help, but I was told I wasn't bad enough. They said that there was a waiting list, several months for help, but I need help now. And what I forgot to put in was 3 strikes and you're out. And we've seen quite a bit of that. So we continue with our journey and we're trying different things as we go along. This is just something to show you. I said earlier that we try and speak face to face with residents. We try not to send letters, but we sometimes we just have light bulbs. So this is a little one that we've had, and sometimes little things make a difference. We looked at our letters that were being sent out to people who are having difficulties paying their rent, and most letters are saying, dear Mrs. Jones-Bell, whatever the name is, I'm writing to you because I'm concerned that your rent account is escalating. And then underneath that, we're sort of offering all sorts of help. We're absolutely here to help you. Please contact us and we can sort of have a chat. We found that talking to some people, they don't open envelopes because they don't want to, and they will only see the first 1 or 2 lines, and then they put it in a drawer and forget about it. So now we're just experimenting on a very small scale, and we're putting "how can we help you" on the envelope, and taking the official stamp away, and how can we help you on top of the letter, and just rewording the letter to see if that's going to get people to engage with us more. Eviction figures are now in the low single figures compared to 50 or 60 before we changed our approach. The main reasons for eviction have been rent or ASB related. Abandoned properties are also a concern. Where do people go? We're currently working with Shelter and others to look at managed moves to help understand and prevent residents becoming homeless. Prevention is the key. Meeting the person, having a good relationship, starting and ending tenancies clean, getting in early at trigger points, and understanding the problem to fix. For some, moving away from the traditional way of working has come easier than others. It takes time and it requires buy-in from the top. We continue on our journey and every day is a learning day. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Sue. I think you can stop sharing your screen now. That was absolutely fantastic. What a brilliant insight into the way that you work at Wales and West. Colleagues that are listening in, please do post your questions for Sue in the Q&A. We'll either pick them up now or we'll take them forward to the panel session at the end of the session. So please do that. Sue, I've got a question for you. I was really interested in your point about asking better questions and how that takes practice. And I'm interested in your tips to all of us, actually, about asking better questions. What have you learned? But also, what role does tenant feedback play? That slide about tenant expectations, how do you know if you've met those tenant expectations? So two quick questions from me.
Absolutely. So the first one is the asking good questions. Honestly, it really does take practice, and we can't be prescriptive about questions because each different person will be a different scenario. So I've asked somebody who's in total crisis and chaos and they're upset and distressed and everything, and just catching her on a particular point where she started to talk about something happy. It was, tell me about your happy place, and were there other times that you were happy and what made those times happy for you? Another one was where somebody was looking out the window and I said, well, this is a beautiful view, and he said, well, that's why I came here. Oh, so what, you know, so sometimes just capturing those good questions. But I would always say you want a question that is going to provoke further conversation, to get closer to understanding the person. So practice, Clarissa. The other thing is knowing how we're doing expectations. We'll find an awful lot out of that in demand. So understanding what demand is hitting the system. If we're not meeting expectations, or, you know, just say, for instance, in our antisocial behaviour, if we're getting a lot of demand hitting the system, what is happening with, or why haven't you? We can sort of look and say, well, you know, there are problems here. Let's get back into the system and see what's going on a person by person basis. So that would be on a wider basis, on a person to person basis. We would have a look at the outcome star. We'd have a look at, are they managing to pay their rent? Are their circumstances improving? And are they going back into I'm okay, or going into I'm okay on that pyramid?
Brilliant, thank you, Sue. We've also had a question in about what training and support did you give your staff to change the way that we deliver? So we know that behaviours and culture are often the most challenging things to change, aren't they? So perhaps if you could answer that, and then I'm going to ask you, if you don't mind, while the next speaker's talking, there are a couple of other questions that have come in, so perhaps you could take a look at them when you're in leisure and type out some of your thoughts in response.
Absolutely, yes. Certainly, taking people along the journey is essential. And the way that we have done that is provide a normative experience, is what we call it. So by showing staff the customer journey, the system journey, and the consequences from the resident perspective, that will usually give people a light bulb, that, oh my gosh, I didn't realise. And that light bulb happened with that first flow I showed you, where we had a procedure that we'd ping out a letter, and yet we were telling people to avoid it. But actually what we were doing was building up barriers so they wouldn't talk to us, and they wouldn't talk to us anymore because we were frightening them. So taking staff along the journeys, and getting them to see it from the customer perspective, put ourselves in their shoes, how would they feel? That is how we're going along, and it is a continuous learn. So we're moving along all the time and sharing learns as we go along.
Brilliant, thank you, Sue. I can see that the questions are flooding in for you, so it's going to keep you busy typing away while our next speakers are. So thank you so much, that was really helpful. We will see you again at the panel session at the end.
Okay. Thank you.
Brilliant. So our next speaker, after a flying start, our next speaker is Natasha Ham from Havard Housing. Natasha is Senior Neighbourhood Income Coach at Havard. She's been researching best practice approaches to tenancy sustainment. And Natasha's going to share her findings with us, including a look at an intensive support model from France. So Natasha, if you don't mind, would you mind turning your camera on, and then you'll be able to share your screen. There we go, the floor is yours, Natasha.
Thank you. Just going to share my screen. Great, so thanks all for coming today and taking the time out of your day for such an important issue. As you can see, my name is Natasha. I work for Harvard as a senior neighbourhood income coach, and I'm also a postgraduate housing student with Cardiff Metropolitan University, studying housing in greater depth. So I wanted to come here today and share some models and research that I found around best practice to stop the cycle of homelessness for those who are actually unable to maintain a tenancy. So before I start, I thought I would share a little bit about me and why I'm passionate about preventing homelessness. Unlike other professionals that work in the sector, I actually chose housing as a career choice. A lot of people that I meet will say that they've fallen into housing from accountancy or nursing, but for me, housing was always a career choice, and that was due to personal experiences. I've seen the direct impact of support issues such as addictions and the impact that has on somebody being unable to maintain a tenancy. I realised that as homelessness was a real probability because of those issues, it was likely that a cycle would begin, and the underlying support issues and addictions and money management issues would still remain and just be passed to another local authority or another housing association, and a real cycle would start to begin. And that really led me to think about others who face this prospect and then enter a very complex homelessness system, trying to meet eligibility criteria, a system that's just full of jargon that is really difficult to understand. And I also noted that currently homelessness actually costs the Welsh economy £23 million per year. And I was starting to think, what can we do to change this, and how do we solve this crisis that we are facing currently? And then I came across the systems that are used in France. So in 2010, France conducted a review of their homelessness systems, and they looked at making real change to address homelessness. A programme called Abandonments was launched, which was a joint-up approach and offered a range of services such as homelessness shelters, specialist mental health facilities, and flats that were designed to actually help individuals with that transition from being street homeless to getting their own tenancy and moving into their own home. And all of this was offered with one common theme, which was integrated care. And this integrated care meant that there were multidisciplinary teams that were all working together for the same aim. They were all under one roof, and these included social workers, psychiatrists, psychologists, support workers, where unlike the UK currently, there was no need for one referral here and one referral there, making it impossible to navigate the system for those who are vulnerable. And it decreased those falling through the gaps. In order to help those that were sleeping rough, a team in France really worked together to locate those who actually wanted assistance. And this is due to the perception that it was too daunting for those who are sleeping rough and homeless to actually speak to a professional in a formal setting about their background and what's led them to become homeless, and the perception that the street actually has a way of institutionalizing individuals, where they then feel removed members from society. Those suffering with dependency issues or support issues, such as alcohol abuse, were not required to abstain in order to have an appointment with a social worker or a support worker. And the view was that if a customer really wants help and to have an appointment whilst under the influence, then who are we to judge? There were no preconditions to temporary accommodation like we have now, such as going cold turkey, because they actually realise that can have a really severe impact on health issues for those individuals. No one was blamed for their situation. There was no deserving or undeserving. And I think the perception was sort of taken of, why should we stop those who are addicts from gaining accommodation just because they can't meet a criteria which is very obvious, of no drugs or alcohol when they are addicted to the substance in the first place. So alongside this programme, France also launched an Unstress the Board programme. And what that was one of the largest European randomised control trials of Housing First. They implemented this between 2011 and 2016 across 4 different French cities, which included Lille, Marseille, Paris, and Toulouse. And what this did is it gave immediate access to accommodation for individuals that needed help with social or medical follow-ups and those at risk. And this trial actually took 705 individuals, and half went through a Housing First programme where they had this immediate access to accommodation, and half went through the usual homelessness routes. They had an average age of 38, and most of them had spent roughly 8.5 years on the streets. Those entering the programme were classed as vulnerable, and 80% in this programme had addiction issues, and 100% of people had severe mental ill health issues. So this programme actually had a legal agreement with private landlords where rent was guaranteed until that person was ready to take over their own tenancy, their own responsibilities. And this really eased pressure on those who were homeless to transition and only take over the rent responsibilities when they were ready to. And again, the programme is based on the belief that housing is a fundamental human right, and that the link between homelessness and mortality rates, unfortunately, is much higher than the general population. So how did it fare? So the results of the programme came as a real shock, with 80 to 85% of those taking the Housing First route sustaining housing after 2 years into the programme. Fewer people were sent to prison than the other group, and hospital stays were 50%, had a 50% decrease compared to the other group. There was a massive increase in the economic and social impacts, and 20% of those on the programme also managed to accomplish employment, training, and voluntary activities. And the recovery and the quality of life scores had improved dramatically. Not to mention, there was also huge cost savings with the decrease in hospital admissions, the decrease of those re-entering the homeless system over and over again. And as a result, this programme was then rolled out to 15 cities across Europe. And I think what this really highlighted was that the implementation of this model can be successful in a European context. It also highlighted the intensive support that's needed and the flexible support that's needed 24 hours a day from people all with the same aim under the same roof, so support workers, social workers. And I think what really helped is often currently at the moment when somebody is homeless and gets accommodation, they have so many referrals to so many different people. They have to retell their very traumatic story to complete strangers over and over again, and have to remember so many referrals, so many appointment times when they have those severe support needs. So I think this really eased the pressures from that. So we've got this model. What next? I think although the model is proven to work, it's important to think about those who actually are still unable to sustain a tenancy long term, and those who are likely to relapse. And they're quite often seen as the people in a persistent cycle of homelessness who may get accommodation, but are actually unable to sustain it on their own and then re-enter. And I think alongside it can be suggested that a sector-wide intervention is needed, with a focus on helping those people sustain the tenancy. And that can be from local authorities, the private rented sector, registered social landlords. And I think from this, it's clear to see that new approaches were needed. So as a passionate housing individual, it was clear to see when working for Habit that we were seeing many individuals who were unable and not ready to sustain a tenancy. They'd got through the need to get accommodation, and after finally getting accommodation, their support issues still remained. The traditional approaches of just handing over keys to a resident and not seeing someone until there's an issue with antisocial behaviour or rent just was not working for us. Evictions were taking place with a reactive service and only really stepping in to help once we knew a tenancy was at risk. And following this, when Universal Credit rolled out, it was also clear for us to see that there was a huge focus on needing to offer value for money for our residents. With residents now actually physically handing over rent money to us, we needed to make sure that we could meet expectations and meet the needs of our residents. So in order to prevent evictions and homelessness, we developed a new asset-based approach in Harvard, and we adapted a new neighbourhood coaching role. This meant that we were able to develop relationships right from the start and build that trust with our residents, and focus on really identifying the aspirations and goals and working in all areas that eventually impacts people's ability to maintain a tenancy. And these included health, support, money, education, and even looking at the barriers to achieving those things, such as confidence. We ensured that issues were dealt with before a person reached crisis point and really got in there at early key stages. And we saw that every individual that was with us were of value and were an asset to their community. And we really encouraged our residents to own their own solutions. So when somebody presented an issue to us that was affecting their ability to maintain a tenancy, we asked them, what would you like to see from this? What would your outcome be? And what would you like us, and what approach would you like us to take? So how has this worked for us so far? So I'm really pleased to say that currently we have very few evictions into homelessness. We've noticed improved sustainability through addressing issues together with our residents. We've also managed to build better links and new relationships externally with a lot of different partners. And we've actually seen our residents are engaging a lot more with this new person-centered approach. And we've sort of changed our approach to make sure that we eradicate a parent-v-child approach and change it to a parent-v-parent approach, which has really led us to build that trust up with our residents and allow them to approach us before they reach that crisis point and open up about their past, about any trauma that they've gone through in the past, which is ultimately affecting their abilities to sustain tenancies. We've also been able to train all members of staff in a much larger bracket than just housing. We have recognised that there is a huge retrenchment of public services, with a lot of support services unfortunately losing funding, and housing being a key player having to fill that gap, which can be very difficult. So although we've not been able to become a one-stop shop or a support service for all, we've been able to make sure that staff are trained in things like mental health first aid, suicide prevention, and ACEs training, so that we can really make sure that we help people maintain a tenancy and sustain a tenancy in the long run. And that's all from me. I'm really looking forward to any questions that anybody has. So I will just stop sharing my screen.
Brilliant. Thanks so much, Natasha. That was absolutely fascinating. Really enjoyed that insight into the French model as well. Please do put your questions in the Q&A for Natasha, and we'll either pick them up in this discussion session, or we will put Natasha to work answering them visually whilst our other speakers are talking. Just to start us off, Natasha, I had a question which is about culture, actually. So the French model that you outlined, you talked a lot about no judgments, no requirements, no hoops to jump through. And I thought felt really importantly, actually, a rights-based approach. How important do you think culture change was to the French model? And then thinking about your own experience in Harvard, the shift to a kind of neighbourhood coaching model, you know, culture change there and support for existing staff. You know, what did you do to kind of manage that change in culture to a different type of arrangement?
That's a great question. I think culture is obviously central to the whole of this, and not having that judgment and the ability to see that although somebody may be in the lowest times of their life now, and that may impact their ability to sustain a tenancy, everybody has value, everybody has aspirations, but there are just barriers to reaching those aspirations, whether it's a support need that hasn't been addressed or whether it's confidence. And I think in Harvard, we've been able to change that culture. We're all here and we all work within housing because we have a passion and we have a real commitment to wanting to reduce the evictions and wanting to help people to sustain a tenancy. So I think that passion was always there for us in Harvard. It was just changing our service and recognising that the old way of doing things was not working any longer, and we were seeing a lot more people with those support issues that needed to be addressed. So I think it was more a case of working together, training together, learning from each other, and looking at best practice approaches to use.
Brilliant, thank you so much. colleagues that are listening in, please do feel free to pop your reflections and your questions in the Q&A for Natasha to look at during the rest of the discussions. And Natasha, we'll see you at the panel discussion later today, so thank you very much for that. Our next speaker is Ryan Miles from Valleys to Coast. Valleys to Coast have worked hard to reduce possession actions with some impressive results so far. Ryan's going to share how they've achieved this and consider the challenges for the next steps in their journey. So Ryan, if you're able to unmute and share your screen, that'd be great. Lovely stuff. Over to you.
Thank you. Let's give this a go. There we go. I hope you can see that now. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Ryan, Customer Accounts Manager at Valleys to Coast, where we have around 6,000 properties covering the entire Bridgend Borough. Those are two really interesting presentations. Now, mine is somewhat basic in comparison, but hopefully you'll take something from it. So Shelter have asked me to speak today to share our journey over the past 18 to 24 months. As mentioned, we've significantly reduced our possession action and enforcement action. So in total, we've reduced our court applications by 91% and our evictions by 81%. Before I share how we achieved this, I wanted to shed some light on our communities. So based on the Welsh Index of Multiple Deprivation, 4 of our communities are in the top 10% most deprived areas in Wales, and 40% of our properties are located in areas which are among the top 20% most deprived in Wales. So let's start by providing some context. So back in May 2018, I was given the opportunity to lead the team responsible for income collection on a secondment basis. I found myself presented with a dilemma. Do I continue with our current approach or change things up? Personally, I knew our approach needed changing. As you can see on the slide there, 2 years ago, we entered 98 cases into court and carried out 29 evictions for non-payment of rent. And if I'm being honest, we also issued notices like they were going out of fashion. Unfortunately, we fell into the all too common trap of using them for engagement purposes. So I carried out a full review of our current approach back then 2 years ago, including a cost analysis to determine how much money we'd lost through unnecessary legal action and evictions, because that was also part of the issue. I won't share the exact figures, but as you can imagine, it was in excess of £200,000. So this review highlighted 2 key issues for me. Firstly, our approach wasn't in line with our values and didn't deliver on social purpose. And secondly, we provided a poor service, and as a result, we didn't maximize income for the organization. It's too easy to send copious amount of letters, as has already been touched upon today, and place the blame on the customer for a lack of engagement. We took a good look at ourselves and asked why this was happening. So as you can see from the flow chart, it's fairly basic. We had a process-driven and transactional approach. It led to low levels of engagement, increased court applications and evictions, loss of income. Now, at the center of all of this were human beings, people being adversely impacted by our approach, but I was part of the problem. Just let me explain. So in December 2017, I attended a property with my colleague to be present for an eviction. Now, when we conducted evictions, there were always 2 housing colleagues, a carpenter, someone to cap the gas, our contractors to secure the doors and windows, and of course the bailiff. Now, 7 people present may appear quite intimidating. As the bailiff entered the property, there was a pile of unopened mail. And in the living room, a fully decorated Christmas tree with presents beneath. On the sofa sat a single mother with her 3 young children at her side. The mum was absolutely distraught and evidently had not been opening her mail. My female colleague spent some time calming mum down and provided all relevant information to get back in touch to collect belongings. The local authority rehoused the family through private accommodation and had to pay to keep the items in storage until the property was available. And not that it really mattered by now, but we didn't recoup any money towards the outstanding debt. Seriously, what type of outcome was this? And I haven't really talked about it until this day, but I was responsible for that eviction. And I said I'd be honest today. I applied for the warrant. I arranged for the eviction to take place. My thoughts turned to my wife and our 5-month-old child at home. both warm and safe with no risk of losing their home. And as I thought about the impact and trauma this incident must have had for the family, it made me feel quite sick. I was naive for allowing this to happen, but truth be told, back then, I didn't know any other way, and I was concerned about becoming desensitized to these type of situations, and it's fair to say I didn't sleep that night. I did, however, speak with a family member a couple of months later, and was pleased to hear that Mum had settled at their new accommodation, and it appeared to have been the fresh start needed. It was a shame that it came under those circumstances. So, we needed to flip our current approach on its head, provide a much better service, and everything else would fall into place. So where did we want to get to? We wanted to offer a tailored and relational approach, which would increase engagement levels, significantly reduce court and evictions, prevent loss of income. Again, at the center of all this, we're human beings, and with this approach, we'd have people being positively impacted by our approach. Now, we had an established team, a well-established team, the majority of colleagues coming from the local authority as part of the stock transfer back in 2003. I'm sure they won't mind me saying, but some colleagues had been doing the job longer than I'd been alive. So I was understandably skeptical about implementing changes. So I did it the only way I knew, in collaboration with my colleagues. So I got their feedback, and it soon became clear that they felt the same way about the role as I did. And I was very fortunate to have a supportive director who simply said, go ahead, do what you need to do, just make it happen. So where did we start? So we decided to visit 10 other housing associations throughout Wales, all with completely different approaches to gather further insight about what did and didn't work. And then upon returning to the office, we would discuss each organisation's approach and what we felt would work for us. On some occasions, I didn't attend and let my colleagues lead the way. It actually felt quite exciting. The start of change for the better and not just for the sake of it. As part of this exercise, I also met with Housing Solutions, some of you may know as the Homelessness Department of the local authority, and Shelter Cymru, to explain our intentions in the hope that we could change perceptions, because I saw that as one of the biggest challenges. Because of the way we had acted and behaved previously, changing perceptions of people outside the team was always going to be difficult. It was quite uncomfortable to hear their thoughts at the time, but it's something that I took on board. So shortly after the best practice exercise ended, I identified 3 key areas. So culture, skills and training, and supportive framework. We quickly learned after a visit to Monmouthshire Housing that culture was crucial if we genuinely wanted to change for the better. Their culture was infectious. There was a genuine desire to help, support, and be empathetic with people. This was also evidenced by their low number of evictions. It was important to provide people with the skills and training for the culture to flourish. And finally, I needed to implement a framework to complement the culture and to ensure good practice was encouraged. And this framework redefined performance for the team. Okay, so I'm stating the obvious here, but it felt like at the time, some relationships with customers were fractured and assumptions were being made all the time, and this needed to change. Our director felt the same, and as such arranged restorative training with the Wales Restorative Approaches partnership. I understand that a lot of organisations are going down that route now, and I'm glad to see that. It was clear that we fell into the 2 category, but we wanted to move to work with customers in a more restorative way. The main theory of restorative approaches is that human beings are happier, more cooperative and productive, and more likely to make positive changes in their behaviour when those in position of authority do things with them rather than to them or for them. The training was great, at times uncomfortable, but it made us truly reflect and understand what empathy means. Empathy and sympathy are two completely different things. The skills we learned then enabled us to build, maintain, and when necessary, repair relationships with our customers. We wanted to establish a 2-way relationship where they would talk to us when things go wrong, and we work together to resolve the issue and move forward. Now, following on from that training course, I would have ripped up the rule book completely, but that wasn't possible. So instead, we stripped away the copious amounts of letters with a big emphasis on personalised contact, and we adopted some principles from the Money and Mental Health Policy Institute. Around that time, they had published a best practice guide for social landlords. So the first thing was around customers getting in touch. So it's around letting the tenants tell us how they prefer to be contacted, and not to assume that people are unwilling to engage simply because they're not responding to your preferred method. So some, as has been touched upon already by Sue, letters, customers don't necessarily respond to letters, especially if they're dealing with mental health situations. And then the second thing was around supporting tenants in arrears. And this is to do with correspondence, and messages should be adapted to offer support to maintain tenancies. We kind of took that a little bit further. We agreed as a team that our communication would be simply asking them to contact us and providing the range of methods and times that would suit them to do that, as opposed to the letter stipulating what needs to be paid or what the next steps were. So for the next 3 to 6 months, I kept our performance under review. Now, the debt did increase as anticipated. Work were patient and supportive, but I soon realised the approach was failing and I couldn't fathom why. After speaking with colleagues and some customers, a few things became clear. So I'll go through each point briefly and just outline how we intended to overcome them. So we've got the customer's perception. Restorative approaches are time intensive, and we fell into the category of doing 4. So we persevered, stating the obvious again, but actions speak louder than words, and we were positively persistent. We made a conscious decision to remove flexi from within the team. There was no longer a need for colleagues to log their hours. I trusted them, and I wanted to remove all restrictions and focus purely on outcomes. They now approach their work with much more flexibility to suit them and the customers. So this includes evening and weekend work. It's not mandatory, but colleagues do it of their own accord, and it's great to see. We also introduced a nudge letter. Now, I appreciate that's a bit like Marmite at the moment in the housing sector, but ours was quite basic. So this letter was hand-delivered in a coloured envelope. It contained a letter with shelter's details, including the local drop-in centre. The idea being that when a relationship had broken down, shelter could advocate on their behalf and we could start to rebuild that relationship. The response was far better than expected. We didn't actually receive one call from shelter, and customers realised our intention was to genuinely help, and they contacted us direct in their own time. So as I've touched upon, restorative approaches is time intensive. I was very fortunate to have a supportive colleague leading the customer services team. We agreed that they would cover any inbound rent calls on an interim basis, allowing us to focus on our new flexible approach, meaning colleagues within my team weren't restricted by phone cover. And alongside this, we put forward a business case for a restructure, which included 2 additional colleagues. Now, in reality, I could have pushed for one of these new automated systems that are in the market right now, but I wanted to invest in people. Now, this would have been difficult because how could I evidence the benefits whilst our overall debt was increasing? So part of this was around painting the picture of what the future could look like and how it would benefit our customers in line with our strategic priorities. But I also broke the rules slightly, just slightly. We had 3 admin colleagues in the team who were office-based, and in terms of income collection, I suppose we could say that they were less experienced than the other colleagues, and they were responsible for sending first letters via electronic post. Now, I threw them in at the deep end, so they were each given a slightly smaller patch with no process, no automated letters or templates. I simply gave one instruction: to make contact and build relationships. And guess what? It worked. It was incredibly successful, with the debt reducing in all 3 patches, and through conversations with these colleagues, it was apparent they had a much better insight into their patch, who their customers were, what they did or didn't need. These colleagues carried out additional duties for an extended period of time with no amendments to their salary, no complaints whatsoever, and they just got on with it. So I was incredibly grateful for that. And it's funny when I say they were considered less experienced, because one of those admin colleagues is now thriving in her new role. Since lockdown, after offsetting any reduction in debt due to tenancies ending, she's still reduced her debt by an incredible 27%. And this is purely down to the fact that this individual gets restorative approaches and understands the importance of building relationships. So on the final part there about falling into the 4 category, we arranged some additional training. But first we looked at restorative approaches to try and understand why we didn't negotiate effectively. We spent some time understanding what it meant. And adult to adult meant having honest and on occasions direct conversations with our customers. We're most certainly not trying to take their home away, but we do have expectations in terms of payments. And as previously mentioned, a bigger emphasis was now on personalised contact, and this was mainly through telephone. And this volume of phone conversations was new territory. Again, just to remind you, this is a well-established team who used to delivering letters. When I covered the role previously, I did describe myself as a glorified postman, which didn't go down too well at the time. So we arranged phone coach training. This provided some much needed confidence, improved our listening skills, and once again emphasized the importance of remaining non-judgmental and that first impressions count. So if we fast forward to February of this year, we held an away day with colleagues from different departments throughout the organisation to plan for the year ahead. We set some tangible goals, one of which was 0 evictions. As part of this day, we also carried out some empathy mapping, which is a really interesting concept and helps you step into the customer's shoes, again, strengthening the non-judgmental and restorative approach. It's so important to not make assumptions. I can't underestimate that, stress that enough. We also looked at the entire year from April through to March and considered what could be impacting our customers' ability to pay at key times. Now, I'm making assumptions when I say this, I know, but bear with me. We then designed what we felt were good proactive interventions. Shortly after the away day, the business case was approved and it was time for recruitment. I was conscious to recruit the right individuals with the right attitude and work ethic, and again wanted to change the image of income collection. As a team, we held an open evening to give prospective applicants the opportunity to meet the team, get a feeling for the culture, discuss in more detail what the job entailed, our change of approach and aspirations. We had a fantastic outcome. We recruited 2 excellent colleagues, one senior support worker from the Woolwich who had worked closely with the crisis intervention team at BCBC, and one housing tutor with a tenant and digital inclusion background. Neither colleague had direct experience of income collection, but they both understood the importance of relationships. So coming back to the away day, of course, there was a better way than for colleagues to sit in the room for the day discussing what could impact customers' ability to pay. So the intention pre-COVID was for all colleagues, including our new recruits, to take off their income collection hats for a full week and just spend time in the community, getting to know people, learn what events were run at the local community centres, what additional support services were in place, speak with their PCSOs, and at the end of the week, the account partners were due to present their findings back to the rest of the team. And of course, we would have gone for a social to introduce our new colleagues. Following on from this, we would have held individual focus groups within each patch for the account partners, but that wasn't possible at the time. Having said that, it can still be done in the virtual world, and we're actually running some focus groups next week, which I'm really, really looking forward to. So we've covered off culture, skills and training. So I just want to touch upon the framework briefly. As I mentioned, this redefined what constitutes good performance for us. So as a starting point, the customer account partners do not have targets. I strongly believe that targets drive behavior, and this doesn't result in a better service. It causes undue stress and anxiety, and it also restricts continuous improvements. Why put limitations in place? If I refer back to my colleague who reduced her debt by 27%, would that have been achieved if the target was 5%? Who knows? We don't monitor the number of cases or actions completed by colleagues. The focus is on quality and doing the right thing at the right time. We of course record levels of debt, but we look at movement in balance month to month by percentage, and we offset any reduction in debt due to tenancies ending. This all places an emphasis on sustainable tenancies, working with people to implement affordable payment plans. Now, based on this, we record the number of agreements per account partner, but in particular, the number defaulted upon and the number that have been successfully completed. This report is shared with all colleagues in the team for transparency, and it allows them to learn from one another, offering support and guidance if required. And on that point, finally, if colleagues have any cases for concern, these are discussed during a problem-solving circle, which has proved invaluable. And behind all of this then, I implemented the quality assurance process just to ensure colleagues receive regular feedback, positive and constructive, to enable continuous improvement. So, am I confident that we now have the right approach? In the main, yes. So if we just look at the outcomes, we've got the correct culture. We now have an adult-to-adult approach. We've reduced our legal action. During lockdown, I challenged the team to work with a very, very limited process. And as of today, we've conducted less than 20 home visits. And I'm really proud to say that we have not issued one notice. And that's just testament to how good the team are at building relationships with the customers. Finally, in terms of outcomes, we asked customers how they felt about our service since COVID. And as you can see from the pie chart, we had a fantastic response. And there's some really nice comments about individual colleagues, which we fed back. Having said all that, I did say I'd be honest. And last year, we still entered cases into court. and we still carried out evictions, with the last one being in November with nothing further planned. We need to strengthen our digital inclusion and employability services. Hopefully we'll do that soon. But now we have the correct structure in place. I'm very confident we're well prepared for whatever the post-COVID world throws at us. I'd really like us to all be in the same position as our friends at Merthyr Valley Homes and Taff Housing, achieving 0 evictions and not making a fuss about it because it's second nature and the right thing to do. And then there's just one final thing from me. It's something really important to bear in mind, that nobody is ever properly motivated by fear. Traditional punishments don't drive positive behaviours. They create traumas, psychological distress, and they perpetuate dependence. Thank you.
Ryan, thank you so much. That was such an honest and hard-hitting presentation. I suspect I'm not the only one that felt desperately emotional when you were describing your story at the beginning. So thank you so much for sharing. I can imagine it wasn't very easy. So thank you. What I absolutely loved that felt like a real theme throughout your presentation was that you really are open and humble and learning constantly as an organisation. You talked about lots of different types of training and support that you put in place. I'm just wondering, was there anything that was most impactful? You know, that if you could put your finger on anything or really say to other colleagues that are listening in and might share some of those concerns that you might have had at the start of the process, what would you recommend? What, you know, one thing that they might do to get them going?
I would honestly recommend speaking to senior management and looking at the Wales Restorative Approaches partnership. It's quite difficult for me to explain and express how much we learned from that. It was an emotional process. It's run over 4 days, but not 4 continuous days because it's quite intense. And on the last day, there were some tears from colleagues, because when you truly understand how to be empathetic, you actually feel those emotions when you're speaking to those customers, and you actually put yourself in their shoes. And once you do that, it's so much easier to build that relationship and negotiate effectively, and that's what it comes down to. So that's why I kind of called the presentation Back to Basics, because it is just for us about people and relationships at the moment.
And we've had a question in, thanks Ryan. We've had a question in which is about kind of the practice, really. So you've talked about a really different approach, which is all about building relationships. Did that have any bearing on the patch sizes for your staff?
Yeah, so we used to have 6 well, they used to be called rent officers. So we've changed our job titles as well. We used to be rent officers and recovery officers. So we've changed now to account partners and account coaches. But we brought in an extra 2. So the patch size, they each have around 250 cases in debt, give or take. But we're about to throw leaseholders into the mix from January as well. So they have a really, really intense workload when they consider what goes into it. But the whole ethos is, if you do it right first time, then your workload becomes more manageable because you've got those relationships, and people will contact you before they get into bad situations. So yeah, but if anyone wants more detail around kind of actual patch sizes and the figures we've got, just drop me an email and I'll happily share that.
That's brilliant, thank you. And last question from me, Ryan, is actually about your board. So you've talked about, you tried some things, some worked, some didn't, that kind of learning, and all of this takes time. And then at the end, you talked a bit about the measurement tools that you put in place. And I'm just wondering, where was your board in terms of their management of risk for the organisation, but also the assurance they need of you and the exec team?
Well, this is why I touched upon how lucky I was to have a very supportive director, because, and I'm being completely honest, I was shielded from that. So those conversations that he would have had, or those assurances, in terms of managing risk, he would have dealt with all those conversations, which purely allowed me to focus on taking the team through the journey to where we needed to go to. In terms of risk, though, I mean, when we look at the cost involved with those 29 evictions and 98 cases we put into court, it was clearly evident that we were going to be saving costs overall anyway. So, but yeah, it's so crucial to have the people higher up in your organization completely on board and backing you 100%.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think that's come through every presentation we've seen, actually, hasn't it? That this change in approach takes time and you have to stick with it. But that's brilliant. Thank you so much, Ryan, for sharing your reflections. Our last speaker before we move into the panel debate is Paul Bevin from Shelter Cymru. Paul coordinates the Oak Foundation funded programme of research and policy work at Shelter Cymru, of which this webinar is funded by. Paul's going to give us a brief overview of their current project, where they're working with Wales and West, Clwyd Allen, and to scope out how to eliminate homelessness from social housing through a combination of radical tenancy sustainment and managed moves. Paul, really looking forward to hearing what you have to say. Over to you.
Thank you, Kirsty. Yeah, well, thank you, Clarissa. And so, as you say, I'm Paul Bevin, and I'm going to talk very briefly about some research we are doing into preventing evictions from social housing into homelessness. But before I start my presentation, as the only Shelter Cymru member of staff here today who's speaking, I'd like to thank you very much for joining the webinar and hope you're finding it very useful. I'm certainly finding it useful and learning an awful lot. And actually, the presentation that I'm going to give you, you'll see that so much of it has actually already been covered by the previous three speakers. And also before starting, I just want to say publicly goodbye to our director, John Pusey. John Pusey has been director for 30 years, but he's retiring tomorrow. He's grown the organisation from providing a few housing advice services to one which now provides advice services in every Welsh local authority, as well as support services, online and telephone advice services for over 20,000 households a year. And John, of course, has had a huge influence on improving housing and homelessness policy and legislation in Wales. And so thank you very much, John, for the difference you've made to so many people's lives, and very best wishes for your time from tomorrow. So what I'm going to talk to you about is a short, small piece of research that we're doing, which is funded by the Oak Foundation, and it's research, as Clarissa mentioned, with Clwyd Allen Housing Association that has over 6,000 homes in 7 local authorities in North Wales, and with Wales and West, and as Sue was mentioned earlier, Wales and West have 12,500 homes in 15 local authorities across Wales. And also Community Housing Cymru and the Welsh Local Government Association are partners to the work. So as we know, there's been a policy push by the Welsh Government, and that's the reason for this webinar today, towards no evictions from social housing into homelessness. And some social landlords, many social landlords, have been taking this approach for a few years, and as we've already heard from 3 of them. And we're looking at how Wales and West, Clwyd Allen and some other social landlords and partners prevent people from being evicted into homelessness, including through managed moves or managed transfers. And the plan is to produce a short report, probably in early 2021, outlining some basic principles of good practice with some case examples. So the research methodology we are using includes desktop research into ways in which people are helped to sustain their tenancies, such as tenancy offloading support services, intense family support to help parents and children, mediation, housing advice. Sarah Powell, who's one of our housing law caseworkers, is interviewing tenants who've been issued with a notice of seeking possession by the social landlord to end a tenancy. And the next stage, of course, would be asking the court to decide whether possession proceedings go ahead. So this is at a very serious stage when people are in real danger of losing their home. So we very much want to hear the perspective of tenants in relation to this research. But we're also interviewing staff from Wales and West and Clwyd Allen, as well as other social landlords, some local authority staff, and indeed our own Shelter Cymru solicitors. Now, it is research, but of course we're talking to people whose circumstances are very difficult and they are in real danger of losing their home. And so we're not just doing research, we are offering help to people. And so Sarah, the researcher, who is a housing law caseworker, or one of our other housing law caseworkers, will help people if they would like to receive help. And it is interesting listening to the earlier presentations, the way we've tried to contact people is by saying that we understand that people are facing difficulties, and if you'd like to help, we're in a position to help, and also, again, if you're willing, we'd like to do some research. So the whole emphasis is on helping in order to start trying to have a conversation with people. So it's very early days. We've only just started to interview a couple of people so far and had a couple of interviews with professionals, but already there are some early themes, early findings, early principles, if you like. And this is where the next few slides, I think, are going to repeat much of what you've heard already, actually, which is quite reassuring. So firstly, culture. We've heard everyone talk about culture. If the social landlord's culture is to help people to keep their homes, then this governs a whole host of other behaviours. In fact, it becomes a failure if someone's evicted, which means that evictions rarely come into the landlord's thinking, and that determines how you approach your work. It means that landlords are always thinking of ways how not to evict. And as we've heard, this is, of course, already the approach of some social landlords. And then the need to define a managed move or a managed transfer. We're not sure whether there's common agreement about what constitutes a managed move. Is it simply a transfer or a management move? Do you need to apply on a waiting list? Are you helped to move into supported housing? Are you offered a property ahead of other people? I mean, essentially, we think it's an agreed and planned move between the tenant and the landlord to help people keep a home. For example, to a smaller, more affordable property, or to a different area to reduce the person's likelihood of antisocial behaviour, or possibly into supported housing. And then, of course, the need to be creative in order to save a tenancy or help the household to move. Just as a couple of examples, I came across an English housing association recently that had a three-way agreement regarding people in rent arrears who were very close to losing their homes. The local authority homelessness department would pay a third of the arrears off. The housing association would write a third off of the arrears, and the tenant would pay a third through a phased repayment plan if needed. So the outcome is that the local authority saves a lot of money potentially on housing a homeless family in temporary accommodation. The housing association receives 2/3 of the arrears when it might otherwise not have received any payments at all. And the tenant has to repay part of the arrears but doesn't become homeless. So that felt like a win-win-win situation for all three parties. Or another creative example is setting up an in-house hardship fund that I've come across. A hardship fund which is funded, for example, by a staff lottery, with half of the monthly prize money going to the winning member of staff and half to a hardship fund for tenants, which could be used to help tenants who perhaps are facing financial difficulty and possibly in substantial arrears. Now, this is where I'm going to repeat a lot of what's been said earlier. Unsurprisingly, really, we are finding that a person-centred approach is often so much more effective than a process-driven approach. This means getting to know the person's situation and adjusting and tailoring our responses accordingly. And this has been extremely well illustrated by all three presenters. And so it is a real repetition, and I haven't, none of us have seen one another's slides beforehand, so that's why it's particularly reassuring to hear that the person-centred approach is clearly being adopted in Howard, Wales, and the West, and Alistair Coast. We don't need to be strictly governed by set policies and processes. These are guides rather than cast iron ways of working. It is good, of course, to have guidance, but a person-centred approach is so fundamental to helping people. And then again, repeating what's been said earlier, the importance of developing good relationships, ideally right from the start of the tenancy, and breaking down the landlord-tenant divide and making it a named person-to-person relationship. It's a Jim to Janice relationship where Jim, who happens to work for a housing association, and Janice, who lives in a flat, know each other. So as individuals, they become much more aware of the impact of their actions on each other, and treat each other in an adult-to-adult way. And then understanding what matters to the tenant when trying to help tenants to keep their home through considering a managed move to another property. It still remains extremely important to understand what matters to tenants. For example, being in the same school catchment area or remaining close to a family member. It's still important to give people as much choice as possible, as of course going forward this may contribute to them managing more successfully in their new home. And as again was being expressed earlier, we're finding in the early stages of this work that good communication is so important, and that it needs to be tailored. So for example, using, it sounds obvious when you say it, but using people's preferred method of communication, such as text, WhatsApp, email, perhaps letters, phone calls, face-to-face visits. We all seem to communicate better in certain formats than others. So, using people's preferred method of communication. And sometimes looking at a better match of housing officer to a tenant possibly that can really aid good communication. So it may be that a younger female housing officer may be a better match to work with a younger female tenant. And communication that is personalised. For example, using letters and messages that apply to the person's individual situation rather than using standardised non-personal letters, and just reflecting on one of Sue's slides towards the end of her presentation around the different style of letters. We've been creative with how we send letters to people if we get to that stage. And then clear communication. Tenants do need to understand what the real situation is that they face. In our casework, we do sometimes come across examples where people owe substantial amounts of money, thousands of pounds, and they've been issued with a notice of seeking possession. But really, until then, they haven't really understood how high the arrears are, or really understood how serious their situation is. And again, as we heard, I think in Ryan's presentation, letters do remain unanswered, unopened rather, let alone answered. So it's making sure that people do really understand the situation that they're in and the potential consequences. And then working with other landlords to find solutions, and also support providers to find solutions. And we're finding in the very early days examples of landlords working very closely together to try to find solutions for people who are close to losing their tenancy. For example, social landlords meeting together in one area to share good practice on how to save tenancies, or even to see if a tenant could be offered a transfer from one housing association to another housing association in the area. And then another example is housing associations, social services and support providers meeting to discuss a tenant situation in almost a social services case review, case conference type way, and trying the whole reason for meeting, of course, being trying to save the tenancy. And this can also involve encouraging tenants to have support from in-house or external support providers. I mean, this sounds quite fundamental, but the housing support grant's main focus is to support people in their homes to prevent homelessness. And so it's important to make use of organisations who provide these invaluable services if you're not tuned into them already. And then in some cases where communication has completely broken down, considering using an independent mediation service to help find a mutually acceptable solution. So those are some of the very early findings, and as I say, we have only just started research, so if I was doing this presentation in a couple of months' time, it might look slightly different, or substantially different, who knows. Now it's too early to say if there'll be a second phase to this project, but if there is, we anticipate that subject to funding, it'll start early next year and could involve working with other organisations and also working with Wales and continuing to work with Wales and Western Clwyd Allen on new ways to help prevent people becoming homeless that come out of this research. And of course, we would like to disseminate the findings of phase 1 and this potential phase 2 more widely across the sector. So if you'd like any more information about this work, do please feel free to contact me on these details, and copies of the slides, of course, will be available to all participants after the webinar. And thank you very much for listening.
Thank you, Paul. That was great. Such an important piece of research. We're really happy to be part of it at CHC and keen to help with that second phase that you talked about around disseminating the findings and seeing what we can learn practically. You're at an early stage in your research, but I was really interested in one of your very early findings about being clear about the reality of the situation and how you balance that, and whether you've had any findings through yet about how you balance that with some of the comments that we'd seen previously from other speakers around people are not motivated by fear. You know, this isn't about scaring people into action. So how do we balance those two things about being honest and open and clear about the fact that things are serious, but not trying to rule through fear?
Oh, it's a good question, Clarissa, and I think it does come down to relationships. Really, it shouldn't necessarily get to that stage. You know, that if you can develop good relationships with people, you're able to tell in the way that suits them best what their situation is. But in one of the interviews that we've done, one of the people genuinely didn't know how much they owed, and it was it was many thousands, and they were alarmed, and so there was some sort of breakdown there. But I think it does come down to relationships at the end of the day, and trying really to work hard to engage with people, as difficult as that can be, I know.
Yeah, absolutely. We've had a question in, Paul, which is around the role of Welsh Government, and what can Welsh Government do to promote and assist that cultural change, which we've talked about across the piece in every single presentation. Is there anything that we think the Welsh Government can do to help us all in that?
That's a good question again. I'm sorry someone sent that one in. Well, Welsh Government, I mean, you know, the culture of any organisation, the culture of our society is led so much by people who are in leadership roles, is determined rather by people who are in leadership roles. So Welsh Government has a huge role to play, and it is playing that role. You know, Julie James, as Housing Minister, has got a clear commitment to really trying to resolve homelessness as much as possible, and to try to, you know, make social housing as accessible as possible, and to reduce evictions from social housing. So Welsh Government can do an awful lot, and that, you know, that is through conversation. It might need to be done through guidance. The Code of Guidance on the allocation of housing and homelessness is being reviewed at the moment. You know, it can be done through guidance. You know, it might need to be done through even legislative change, but you know, it is a way of being, though, in a way. You know, culture is a way of being, and it's about how you approach life, really, how you approach homelessness and housing, and so it becomes part of you. And I think, for me, I've certainly picked that up from the three previous speakers, and that, you know, and I'm sure there, you know, and there are, of course, many others in the social housing sector who would feel the same.
Yeah, absolutely. If I could use my chair's prerogative to share a reflection, we've been running lots of events with colleagues from inside the housing association sector, but also outside. So we've had 90 or so colleagues from external organisations talking to us about big barriers around ending homelessness, and culture's come through really strongly. And we've asked that question to ourselves, that actually, is all of this just within our gift as organisations to just make real progress on? And the answer that we've had back is partly yes. And we, you know, those points that you've just raised, Paul, about leadership are really important, I think, in all levels. But the other part of that answer that came through was there are some things that don't help. And so things like short-term funding streams, competitive type environments, things that kind of can create a culture that pit us against each other sometimes, that doesn't help some of that collaboration and collegiate kind of activity. So one of the things that certainly at CHC we're trying to think about is how do we bottle what happened during the pandemic, where actually organisational rivalries and, you know, the scrap for cash was kind of put to the side, and actually it was absolutely all about who is best placed to take the action to make the real difference. So there's a bit of both, I suppose, going on there.
Yeah, so that's very interesting. Yes, that tendering, competition between housing associations and indeed support providers, care providers. You know, it's gone a bit crazy over the last 10 years or so. In my eyes, it's gone too far in one direction, and the partnership working for certain people of a certain generation, the partnership working of years and years ago that we used to go on, where there was a lot of good practice shared, and people weren't afraid to talk to one another and share policies and procedures, share ideas. You know, it's there now, of course, but there are hindrances, and competition between each other is a hindrance to a degree. And of course, a huge hindrance to a lot of us is, of course, we still haven't got enough social housing. You know, that's so fundamental. You know, it's all very well talking about management, but where do we move people to, you know, if they want to move, if there isn't enough housing? And you know, that it almost goes without saying, but it does have to be repeated consistently until we do have enough affordable social housing.
Absolutely. Thank you, Paul. Paul, if you just stay there, and I'm going to invite the other panelists to turn their cameras on, because we're moving into the panel debate. Lovely. Hi, welcome back, everyone. And also welcome to Councillor Lewis from Swansea City Council, who's joining us for the panel debate. Welcome, Councillor Lewis, who will give the local authority perspective. So now we've got 25 minutes or so to talk a little bit about how we achieve zero homelessness from social housing. As always, everybody who's still listening in, please do pop your questions in the Q&A, and I will try and pick up as many as I can during the conversation. What I'm going to do is I'm going to kick off with one question, which I'm going to ask all of you to answer in turn, actually, because it's one of those big questions that that feels interesting. I'm interested to hear your thoughts on it. So the question is, if you had the luxury of unlimited government grants to design the perfect zero homelessness system for your local area, what would it look like? And Councillor Lewis, I hope you don't mind, I'm going to start with you, because you can give us your thoughts on perhaps what you've heard, but also what in a perfect world, what would you like to see?
Thank you. And I think my answer actually will be relatively brief. Firstly, a top priority would be access to more affordable accommodation. I think that is really key. We're seeing a significant deficit across the board, particularly of 1 and 2 bedroom accommodation. And if we could increase that to match the demand, then that would go a long way to helping. More trauma-informed support services would be helpful. We know that people have complex needs. We know Housing First has been successful and works, and that wraparound multi-agency support, but we need to make sure that that support is in place as well, and is properly funded. And that goes quite smoothly into health and mental health services working well together. I think that's something that's really key, and increased access to disabled accommodation would be very helpful as well.
Fantastic, thank you. Who'd like to go next to describe your perfect world?
Yeah.
Sue, thank you.
Okay, I'd like to see in my perfect world a holistic approach, team type thing, because we see a lot of residents who do have complex needs that have maybe dependency, substance misuse, mental health, and we see the domino effect, and they have so many, it's so hard for them to get everything addressed. And you know, I think if we could have more holistic teams that work together, do away with criteria and eligibility, and those that ask for help get help. And I also think partnership working is up there to holding the heart of the individual, you know, to get them the right help that they need together.
Thank you, Sue. Anyone else like to share their thoughts?
I'm happy to go next.
Thank you.
Very similar to what Sue and Andrea have said. I think it's all about affordability. At the moment, we say we have affordable accommodation, but that doesn't seem affordable anymore in today's society. So I think we need to rethink what affordability means to people. currently. I also think, again, that we need a more joined up approach. We need to be working closer with other sectors and a more holistic approach, as Sue mentioned earlier. I think that's really important. And I think we really need to look at our complex homelessness system currently. It is really complex to navigate through. And I think when someone's homeless, we should only really be asking two questions, a very basic system. One, are you homeless? And two, what help do you need? And so I think by changing our systems, looking at our systems, working in a more holistic way, that for me would be my perfect system.
Thank you, Natasha. I love those two questions. They really do go to the root of the issue. Ryan, do you want to share your thoughts?
Yeah,
please?
so mine's basically been covered again, but for me, build more truly affordable homes, prevent silo working. We're all in a position where we shouldn't be competing, and that we work closer with other sectors such as housing and health coming together just for a common goal of sustainable tenancies. It's just a common decent thing to do. And it should be simple, but unfortunately the world we live in means it's not that simple at the moment.
Thank you. And Paul, any final reflections?
Always dangerous to go last because
No, sorry.
I agree with everything that's been said. You know, it is around employing the right staff, you know, it's employing the right leaders with the right mindset. It is around having the right support services in place. I mean, I'm of the view that anyone can sustain a tenancy with the right support. And so having the right support is essential. And as I think everyone said, it's about having enough affordable housing of the right type in the right areas.
Thank you. We've had a question in just asking about ASB. So quite a lot of the presentations are focused on rent arrears, but there's some interest in actually what difference has the approaches that you've all outlined made to the way that you tackle serious antisocial behaviour in your local patches. Does anyone have any reflections? It doesn't have to be everybody, but that's one or two of you to share a reflection on how it's gone. Sue, do you want to kick us off, please?
Yeah, we had a look at our antisocial behaviour system, but there was that debate whether it was a system or not. But anyway, we looked at it, and we found that the top demands were, I want to complain noise, I want to, you know, but again, that was a presenting issue. And when we got into the work, we found that an awful lot of it wasn't antisocial behaviour. There were reasons behind noises and other things. So very much more now we use the restorative approach in the way that we speak to people, we get to the underlying cause of the problem. And we don't think, you know, an awful lot of the cases that we look at, the people aren't bad. There's circumstances that need looking at and understanding. So I think we're much less the enforcer now and much more the restorative approach. Let's find out the cause of the problem.
Thank you. Any other views on ASB in particular?
If I can just come in very quickly. I think COVID has been a real... It's been a positive, unbelievably, in this respect. I think in the past, where there was issues with antisocial behaviour, there might have been a quick leap to relocating somebody into a different community or moving people on. And obviously this wasn't possible during the pandemic and has really forced local authorities to go more mediation and actually having conversations with people to explain the impact that their antisocial behaviour is having on their neighbours. And we've seen some real successes, actually, where there's been some, it's fair to say, some difficult individuals with some difficult reasons behind their ASB. But the mediation has been really successful once we've had conversations explaining how it's impacting on their neighbours, and it's worked really well and really positively. I appreciate it's not always the case, but I think it's really a lesson for us that's learned that mediation does have a role to play here, and it's not always the right go-to to just move somebody on and potentially move the issue on. It's about having that grown-up conversation with a person or a family to talk about the impacts, which they might not necessarily be aware of.
Thank you, that's brilliant. And another question is that one criticism of what we've spent today talking about, zero evictions messaging, is that it might encourage non-payment of rent, and that rent is optional in some way, shape or form. What do you think about this? Is that a real risk in your view? Does anyone want to kick us off?
I'm happy to kick off if you...
Lovely, Andrea, then perhaps Ryan after. Thank you.
Don't want to dominate the conversation here, but I think actually parochially, locally, our anecdotal evidence is that we haven't seen an increase in rent arrears because of the no eviction policy. I think the majority of tenants you'll find want to pay their rent. And I think it's important to have that distinction between those who can't and those who won't. And, you know, there's very legitimate reasons why some people can't pay their rent. And it's about working closely with them to work through those barriers and try and support them. And as a local authority, we are currently looking at our rent policy, and that's very much around how we approach rent arrears, and with a focus on early intervention and prevention, getting in early. I appreciate it's been mentioned with previous speakers that the previous approach got to the point where there was an eviction order, and that stimulated discussion with a tenant. We've seen similar things where it's that last dramatic warning letter that you know, sort of encourages them to reach out to us for help. But I think there is a role for us to reach out first and to offer that help and support early on. And I think that could mitigate rent arrears. There is a caveat as well to what I've said, that I think there is a concern with the no eviction policy, that it may deter some landlords from taking on tenants. And I think that's something that we do need to be acutely aware of. I'm not sure how that's addressed, but I think some landlords may be reluctant to take tenants on because of the risks. Just highlighting that.
Thank you. Ryan, did you want to add to that?
Yeah, Andrew's covered most of what I was going to say, to be honest, but I don't ever feel that a tenant would choose not to pay their rent. They may have different priorities, but then that's our role to have those conversations with them to understand what those priorities are, how we can support them through that time to ensure that they do pay their rent. And for us as an organisation, we don't have any intention to bring in a no eviction policy, but it's just something that we strive to achieve without the need for a policy. So I don't think that it presents a risk at all, personally.
Thank you. Any final views?
So I couldn't agree more with what everybody else has said, but I also think that from my experience and from what I have seen personally, I can say that when people don't pay their rent, there's usually another underlying issue, such as they don't like the location they're in, they don't like where they're located, that it's not convenient for them. And a lot of the time there's other reasons for not paying rent. Again, it's not that people don't want to pay rent, it's either that they can't or they're not happy with the home that they're in currently. So I think it's about looking at those issues.
Thank you. Councillor Lewis mentioned one of the risks or perceived risks here, which is about risk aversion around allocations. And interested in the panel's view on that, whether that's a real risk that they've seen or they feel, and also the role, what support do landlords need to ensure that that doesn't happen? What's the role of other providers, partnership, to make sure that tenancy sustainment and preventative activity is as fantastic as it can possibly be? So thank you.
Okay, so I guess it's what is the risk and who is the risk to. I mean, we are having a lot of residents in who have issues and need support in certain ways, and as long as that support can be provided and those residents are living a good life, and everybody is safe. But we have had some cases, certainly one of the first cases that we looked at when we were looking at tenancy sustainability in more detail was a lady who came to us. She was nominated, she was homeless. And when we met her, she was a very anxious lady. She was very nervous. And she absolutely wasn't ready to start a tenancy on her own. And we said to her, you know, what's really important to you? She was still thinking. She wanted to be close to shops and a doctor. She didn't want to be in that area at all, but was sort of encouraged to widen her choice. So when she came to us, she had lots of steps up to a property. There was no lift. It was very isolating where she was going to be. And we genuinely didn't feel that that property was the right fit for her if she was going to sustain her tenancy. So that was one of the cases that we sort of challenged, really, because we felt that it wasn't the right time, the right place for her. And putting her there would have been at risk to herself. And as it happened, the lady ended up going back into hospital a few weeks afterwards and was there for several months. So she was terribly unwell anyway, which begs another question. But yeah, so risk, yeah, I see it as a risk to them. And is it that, I know we can't cherry pick and we don't cherry pick, but if we feel that that tenancy can't be sustained and it's a risk to them, then we would question it and do what we can.
Thank you, Sue. Any other comments? Okay. We've had a question in through the chat around affordability. So in particular, with affordability being a real challenge with the current economic environment that we have, how important is it? What's the role of welfare in particular? How important is it that LHA covers the true cost of rent? Any thoughts on that?
Clarissa, I was actually chairing the Housing Cabinet Members Network meeting this morning, and LHA rates was very much the sense of frustration on the call with all local authorities, because obviously different areas, different levels of rent and different varying gaps in rent, and it's a real concern for us. And I know Welsh Government and the WLJ have been lobbying central government to try and get a more reasonable, sensible, logical approach to this. But just to flag up really that I'm sure this frustration is shared with the housing sector organisations across the board. And I think it's not an easy one for us to tackle because it's not within our gift, but we'll keep continuing to lobby.
Thank you. We absolutely share that frustration and likewise lobbying is incredibly challenging. Any other views on affordability more broadly? The work that you might be doing within your own organisations to make sure affordability is kind of at the heart of some of your decision making might be of interest?
I think it's really important to get the customer voice. I think that's crucial, to really look at communities and the individuals living within our communities to see what is affordable for them, rather than just taking the figures and making a decision based on those from Welsh Government when rent setting. I think it's really important to involve the customers to make sure that the accommodation that we are offering is genuinely affordable to those that are in that housing need.
Absolutely, I think it's such an important point, Natasha. One of the pieces of work that we've been doing at CHC with housing associations is around something called local rent policies and ensuring that tenants are engaged and they're co-produced is absolutely at the heart of those. Even they're just simply not credible without it. It is as important as making sure that the data that you use to really understand the affordability challenge is on a parity with that. Okay, question from me, which is where do you find are the biggest service gaps or service failures that might stand in the way of homelessness being prevented? Who wants to go first?
I'm happy to go first.
Thanks.
So that's a really good question. For me, I think that it's different sectors working together, because all different sectors have different targets, different priorities, and quite often they can be disjointed. So for me, that would be mine. Thank you,
Councillor Lewis.
Yeah, I think it's important, critically important, that you have the right support at the right time. I think one of the challenges that we face quite often is when people at very short notice reach crisis point. For example, a relationship breakdown or domestic abuse. And that is very challenging, to trying to prevent homelessness at that point in a short space of time when there's not much time for mediation. I think another frustration as well is mental health legislation preventing us from helping people, particularly rough sleepers. You have to have someone diagnosed, for example, before you can help them, and you know that they've got issues, but that diagnosis is not in place, and so that can cause frustration as well. And as has been mentioned, the local housing allowance rates are a huge barrier as well, and also households that aren't eligible for assistance, so the no recourse to public funds. Again, we've been writing, and it's falling on deaf ears, unfortunately, to central government, but we'll keep trying.
Thank you. Any other views? Paul, thank you.
I'd like to sort of reinforce just one aspect of what Andrea said there, that around mental health and substance misuse services as well. Often mental health services and substance misuse services are criticised for not being able to get to people quickly enough, and it's in a way it's not their fault. It's because both of those services, from my perspective, are substantially under-resourced. And so, it's really hard to get access to mental health services, to psychotherapy services, which is so important to so many people. There's a big gap in funding and personnel in those two areas in particular, I think.
Thank you, Paul. We've had a query through around rent in advance or rent on time, whatever you want to call it, and the impact that might have. So interested in the approaches that some of the landlords on our panel take to rent in advance, where it causes affordability challenges. If it does, what do you do then? Is there any learning you might share with those that are dialing in? Ryan?
Yeah, so we don't operate a rent in advance policy. When you factor in some of these circumstances, where people are coming from, and whether or not they've got that money to pay up front. We do have conversations with potential new tenants prior to them having the tenancy. We used to have a checklist which would put in standardized costs for certain things. Now we just have a honest conversation with the person moving in. What are their outgoings? What potential stuff might they need when they move in? Do they need support with that? We do ask that people pay extra to get in advance, especially those claiming housing benefit that could potentially migrate over to UC. But it's certainly not something that we offer. My concern, if we did push for a rent in advance policy, would be we'd be excluding a lot of people, or we'd essentially be asking the local authority to use a lot of their funds up front to ensure that we house people, and that's not working together. So that's currently where we stand at the moment.
Thank you. Any other views?
Yeah.
So,
we don't do it either. I absolutely mirror what Ryan says. It would be a real concern that people who are coming into our properties who maybe are not can financially afford it, that they would go into debt at the beginning of their tenancy just to pay that upfront money. So it's not something that we do or have considered.
If I could come in very quickly as well, we don't ask for rent in advance or a bond. We see that as a barrier to accessing housing. I think that's something that's an area that perhaps Welsh Government might want to look at in terms of a consistent approach across the sector, and possibly the Rent in Homes Act could help address this. It is difficult at the moment. I know Sue mentioned in her presentation about universal credit and people having to wait 5 weeks for any income. And that's something we're really acutely aware of. And we don't really want to add to the burden and stop people from accessing much needed affordable housing. So that's where we stand as local authorities.
You'd expect me to say this working for Shelter Cymru, but I'll say here to Ryan, Andrea, and Sue's approach. But we don't support rent in advance in social housing as a condition of moving in. It's just such a difficult, expensive time for so many people, and it sometimes goes back to an earlier question you asked about allocations, actually, and it begs the question sometimes, who is social housing for? And very often it's for people who are the most distant from private, to rent privately, or being able to own or occupy, of course. And very often people in those situations are people who are in difficult financial, they're on low incomes or on benefits. And to expect a month's rent in advance from a social housing provider, I think is asking too much.
Completely agree. And from our point of view at Harvard, we are the same. We recognise that people that are claiming universal credit or welfare benefits are going to be paid behind, and their account is going to go into arrears. So we encourage people to make a small payment if it's affordable for them, to make sure that their account doesn't fall into arrears. However, if somebody cannot afford it, we recognise that and we review it months and months down the line.
Thank you, Natasha. And the last question from me is that as a campaigning organisation, we have our eyes firmly set on the elections next year, as I'm sure others in this room will. If you could ask either the current Welsh Government or the new Welsh Government to do one thing, what would you ask? What can they do to change culture, behaviours, the way that we do things around here in Wales? Councillor Lewis, would you like to go first? And I think Ryan had a view as well he wanted to express.
The top of my wish list is some stability in funding, because we have business plans. We need to be able to plan for the medium and long term. I know it's been mentioned with previous speakers that this short-term funding is really difficult to spend. It's difficult to retain quality good staff as well, because especially with the revenue funding, you want to attract good people and you want them to have the time to be able to build relationships and trust with tenants. And they can't simply do that when they're constantly worrying about when the next paycheck is coming from or if the funding is going to be there in the next year. So that would be my top ask.
You're here to that. Ryan, did you want to come in on this?
Yes, please. So I agree with Andrea, but just to add to that as well, I would like Welsh Government to ensure that there's a degree of transparency throughout the housing sector in Wales. It's something that's been talked about a lot, ending homelessness, but we don't know who's doing well and who's not doing well. So last year, Welsh Gov published Understanding Social Housing Evictions in Wales. Now, all the data contained within that report was anonymous, and there was some bad practice in there around notices, so on and so forth. Well, wouldn't it be nice in a post-COVID world that we share that data, completely transparent? We know who's doing well, we can reach out to them and find best practice. And those organisations that are struggling, Welsh Gov can reach out to them separately to establish why and see if there's any additional support that's required. There's got to be a degree of transparency so that we know that what we're trying to do is having some kind of success.
Yeah, and it's broader than that as well, isn't it, Ryan? I mean, I know one of the recommendations from the Homelessness Action Group, which I sat on, was around making sure that there's proper core data set in Wales so that the decisions that we make in Wales are properly evidence-based. And that is incredibly challenging at the moment with the data we have available. Any last comments before we wrap up? Paul?
And I think my ask would be for there to be a right to housing. And I say that because from that springs all sorts of other things, so a right to housing means there has to be enough housing, and a right to housing means there has to be enough affordable housing, and it also means that homelessness becomes addressed in a more holistic way. So that would be my ask.
Thank you, Paul. Sue, Natasha, any final comments?
For me, I completely agree with all the comments that have already been made. For me, one of the huge things is relooking at our whole homelessness system, taking away all the jargon, the complexities, the criterias, and again, going back to those two fundamental basic questions of, are you in need of housing and what help do you need, so that we can really look to address those.
Lovely, thank you.
And just to add on to that is that if we were going to have enough properties that people could move in and prevent homelessness, we could then do away with temporary accommodation. So when somebody moved into accommodation, it would be more sustainable. They would be settled straight away rather than have to go through that transitional stage.
Lovely, thank you. I'm going to use my chair's prerogative to put my wish list in, which is a target of at least 20,000 social homes, and the funding to back it up would be a pretty good start, I think, for the next government. Thank you all so much for your contributions, your reflections. It was incredibly honest, and I can see from the comments that were flooding in that people were really genuinely engaging and learning from your experience and expertise. So thank you for sparing the time and sharing with us. A recording of the webinar will be available to watch on the Shelter Cymru online training store. And I've also been asked to highlight that they have a range of e-learning courses available for you to access, as well as more on the way. And also keep an eye out for the Shelter Cymru research published early next year that Paul referenced in his presentation. That work's ongoing at the moment. I'm really looking forward to seeing what comes out of it. So that's it from us. Thank you so much for participating and engaging, and I hope you've enjoyed. Thank you.